The smell came first, before anything had a name to it. Cold reed water, the green-black bite of marsh muck, stirred up by an animal that had been thrashing in it, and wood smoke threading thin and gray through the dawn from a single chimney half a mile away. The fens kept a particular silence at that hour, the kind that pressed against the ears like wool, and the smoke seemed almost loud against it. A heron, somewhere out in the deeper water, lifted off with a sound like wet cloth being shaken, then nothing again. Then the scrape of a boot on stone, and a woman bending at the edge of the reeds, with her skirt bunched at her hip, peering down at something that was not supposed to be alive, and was anyway. Sable Iverland had been a widow for 4 winters and a marsh midwife for 9, and she knew every shape that washed up in the reed barrow fens between first frost and full freeze. Drowned dogs. The occasional poacher's deer that had bled out wrong. Once, a horse, which had taken her 3 days to bury in pieces because the ground would not let her dig deep enough. None of those shapes had ever been a wolf the size of a yearling pony, with a foreleg snapped clean and bent the wrong way at the joint, and silvering at the muzzle in a slow tide that did not belong on any animal she had ever heard of. Wolves did not silver like that. Old men silvered like that. Kings, in stories. She crouched. The wolf's eye opened, yellow as resin, and tracked her without lifting its head. There was no growl, there was no flinch. There was a shudder that ran the whole length of his ribs, and then a long, shallow breath that smelled of fever and copper. And Sable, who had told herself for 4 winters that she did not bring strange things home anymore, set her basket down in the muck and unbuckled her cloak. The drag took until the sun was high. She lashed him onto the runner sled she used for hauling peat, and she walked the half-mile to her cottage, one slow step at a time, with her hands raw on the ropes, and her breath sawing white in front of her face. The wolf did not fight her. He could not have fought a kitten. By the time she got him over her threshold and onto the rushes near the hearth, his fur was matted with marsh, and his foreleg was so swollen that the skin had gone shiny. And Sable did what she had always done when something too big for her was bleeding on her floor. She put the kettle on. She washed her hands. She started. She splinted the leg with 2 lengths of green willow and a strip of linen torn from a shift she had been meaning to mend. She packed the worst of the swelling with a poultice of marsh root and bruised yarrow, the kind she made for women whose labors had gone wrong, and she fed him broth off the end of a wooden spoon by tilting his head into her lap, which was a thing no sensible woman would have done with a wolf, and which she did anyway, because his eye had opened on her in the reeds and had not closed since. He shook through the first night. She slept on the floor beside him with her hand on his good shoulder, so she would feel it when the shaking stopped. It did not stop. He shook through the second night too, and dreamed, his paws twitching as though running, his breath coming in soft, broken whines that were almost words. On the 3rd night, she sat up at the small hours and watched him by the banked coals and saw, very clearly, the shape of a man inside the shape of a wolf, the way you sometimes see the shape of the bone inside a hand held up to firelight. She did not say anything about it. She had been raised to know that some things you did not name, because naming was how the village had hanged her mother. Outside, under the woodpile, the otter watched. The otter had been there since the thaw, half feral, all whiskers and indignation, a long brown ribbon of an animal that had decided Sable's woodpile was her woodpile, and that Sable herself was an acceptable feature of the landscape. She had no name. Sable did not name things she could not keep. The otter ate fish heads off the back step when offered, and sometimes climbed into the kindling basket to sleep, and was not afraid of anything Sable had ever brought across the threshold, including the wolf. On the 2nd morning, the otter had come right up to the hearth and sniffed the wolf's tail, and then gone back outside without comment, which Sable had taken, in the way one takes signs from a marsh, as a verdict. On the fourth dawn, the rushes by the hearth were empty, a scorch print of dog warmth, a scatter of gray hairs. The willow splints chewed clean through and laid neatly side by side, as though by careful hands. The door, which she had barred from the inside, stood open onto the cold. Sable stood barefoot on her own threshold for a long time, looking out at the white breath of the fens and feeling nothing in her chest where, all her life, her heartbeat had been loudest. She thought, at first, that she was simply cold. Then she thought, with a small detached interest, that perhaps she had died in the night and not yet noticed. Then the otter came around the corner of the woodpile, carrying a fish too big for her, and dropped it on Sable's foot. And Sable laughed once, sharp and surprised, and the laugh went into the place where her heartbeat used to be loudest, and did not come back out. She did not understand what that was then. She would not understand it for several days. She closed the door, banked the fire, and went to the spring to draw water as she had done every morning of her widowhood. And the otter followed her at a distance of exactly 4 paces, which was the otter's customary diplomatic spacing. And the world, for a few hours, was as ordinary as it had ever been. On the 5th dawn, the world was not ordinary anymore. She woke to a silence that was not the marsh's silence. The marsh was never truly quiet. There was always a frog, a reed knocking another reed, the small wet conversation of water finding its level. This silence was different. This silence had weight. It pressed on the cottage walls the way a snowdrift presses. And Sable sat up in her narrow bed and reached for the iron poker she kept beside it, and went to the window in her shift, with her hair still in its night braid, and looked out, and forgot, for a long suspended moment, how to use her lungs. They were seated. That was the first thing her mind tried to hold and could not. They were seated in concentric rings around her cottage, ring after ring after ring of them, and every one of them was a wolf. And every one of those wolves wore something that was not quite a crown and was unmistakably one. A band of braided iron, a circle of bone, a worked silver collar gone black with age, a single white feather threaded behind one ear. Their breath went up in 350 separate plumes in the cold, and their eyes, all of them, were on her door. None of them moved. None of them growled. The otter sat on top of the woodpile with a fishbone in her teeth and watched the wolves with the bored attention of a magistrate watching a slow trial. A man walked out of the tree line. He was naked except for a cloak that did not fit him, borrowed from someone smaller, slung around his shoulders and held closed at the throat with one scarred hand. He was tall. He was thin in the way men are thin after a long fever, with the bones of his ribs visible above the cloak's edge, and his hair was wet and dark, and going silver at the temples, in the same slow tide she had watched on the wolf's muzzle 3 nights running. His left foreleg, his left arm, was bound in a sling of marsh linen torn from a shift she had been meaning to mend. He stopped at the edge of her dooryard. He did not come closer. He waited, and the rings of alphas waited with him, and Sable understood, in the part of her that had grown up watching her mother stand trial, that she was being looked at by a court. She opened the door anyway. She had never, in her life, been good at staying inside when something was waiting for her on the other side of a piece of wood. "You walked off with my splints," she said. The man's mouth moved. It might have been the start of a laugh. It might have been the start of an apology. Whatever it was, he swallowed it and tried again. And his voice, when it came, was lower than she expected and rougher. The voice of a man who had not used his throat for human speech in some time. "I owe you a shift, and a great deal else. You owe me an explanation first." She stepped out onto the threshold barefoot, which was not wise. and felt the cold of the flagstone climb her ankles, and decided she did not care. "Why are there 300 wolves in my dooryard?" 350. "That is not better." "No, it is not." He told her then, standing in her dooryard with his breath going up in the cold, and the rings of crowned wolves watching him without blinking, who he was. He told her his name was Corith Vale, which meant nothing to her, and that he was called the Hollow King in some places, which meant slightly more, and that 2 centuries ago every pack in the known world had bound itself to a single pact under a single sworn ruler, and that he was, currently and reluctantly, that ruler. He told her that 9 nights ago he had been poisoned in a stone bed 3 days' run to the north, and that his second self, the wolf that lived under his skin, had slipped its leash and gone to ground while his human body lay dying. He told her that every alpha alive had felt the thread of the pact go slack the night she splinted his leg, and that they had tracked the slackness to her door. He told her, last, that the wolves seated around her cottage were not a pack but a council, and that they had come to watch her for 9 days, and that on the 9th day they would vote, and that the vote, if it went the wrong way, would be unanimous, and that under old law, his own voice would be required to be one of those votes. Vote on what? He looked at her. His eyes were yellow as resin. They had not changed since the reeds. On whether your mercy was a leash. She did not understand. She would not understand for some hours. But she stepped back from the door and held it open, because the man was shaking now. Fine tremors that ran the length of his bound arm, and whatever else he was a patient who had walked too far on a freshly set bone. "Come inside, before you fall down on my step." He came inside. The rings of wolves did not move. The otter, on top of the woodpile, finished her fishbone and went to sleep. He sat at her table because she pointed at the chair, and he ate the bread she put in front of him because she told him to, and he drank the broth she ladled out of the same pot she had fed him from when he had been a wolf. And through all of it, the cottage was so quiet that Sable could hear the small clicks of his teeth against the spoon. He ate like a man who had not been certain, until the food was in front of him, that he would ever eat again. She watched him from the other side of the table, with her hands folded in her lap, and her shift pulled close at the throat, and her mind moving very fast and very carefully through the geometry of what he had told her. 350 alphas, 9 days, a vote that could go unanimous, her mercy as a leash. "They think I bound you," she said, when he had set the spoon down. "Some of them, by accident, by touch, by care, by being what you are, in the marsh, on a night when I was something I could not control. I am not a witch. I did not say witch." His good hand lay flat on her table. The scars on the back of it were old, white, and many. "We have an older word." She waited. He looked at the table, not at her. "It will not translate cleanly. The closest your tongue comes is something like one who can refuse a bond. Do you understand what that means?" "No." "Among my people, a true bond is the law beneath the law. It cannot be coerced. It cannot be faked. It recognizes itself across class and species and prior obligation. It is the one thing in our world that no king can override, including me." He lifted his eyes. The yellow in them was very steady. "There are stories, old, half-forgotten, mostly disbelieved, of certain humans who can stand in the path of a true bond and say no, and have the no be honored. not because they are protected, because the bond itself does not survive their refusal. It unmakes. It does not reroute. It ends. That is not a thing I have ever done. I know. I would not know how. I know that too. He breathed out. It is not a power. It is a craft, a learned discipline of the will. Most who carry it do not know they carry it until they are tested, and most who are tested are killed before the test concludes, because the carriers tend to come from villages that hang their mothers. She went very still. He saw her go still. He did not look away. I am sorry. I have been listening at your hearth for 3 nights. I heard your dreams. The kettle ticked on the hob. Outside, one of the wolves coughed, a small, dry sound, and was answered by another, and then the silence resettled. My mother was a midwife, Sable said after a long time. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. She was hanged for refusing a marriage the lord of our valley had arranged. He said she had used a charm on his son to make the boy refuse the match. She had not. The boy refused on his own. They hanged her anyway. I was 11. Yes. I have never used a charm in my life. No. I have, however, spent 30 years training myself not to need one, not to want anything strongly enough that anyone could mistake the wanting for a working, not to stand in any man's path, not to refuse anything out loud. He closed his eyes. It was the first time he had closed them since he walked out of the tree line. When he opened them again, the yellow had gone darker, almost the color of old honey. The council, he said carefully, wants you dead because they believe a human who can refuse a bond is a knife pointed at the throat of every pact we have ever sworn. They are not entirely wrong. If you can refuse mine, you can be made to refuse others. You can be coerced. You can be used. The cleanest answer, by their reckoning, is to remove the knife. And your reckoning, my reckoning, is that the only knife worth keeping in the world is one that cannot be made to cut against its own will. His good hand opened on the table, slow, like a man laying down a card. I have a wolf inside me that has wanted you since the reeds. He is, at this moment, howling at me to claim you before the 9th dawn. Because if you are claimed, the council cannot vote. A claimed mate is sacred. A claimed mate cannot be touched. Then claim me, she said before she had thought about it and was appalled at herself. No. She blinked. No. Because the only claim worth having from you is one made with the refusal still intact. I will not ask you to give up the only thing in you that the council fears. I will not ask you to be safe at the cost of being able to say no to me. If you choose me, Sable Iverland, I want you to choose me as someone who could have refused and did not. Anything else is the leash they are accusing you of being. She stared at him. The fire popped. The otter somewhere outside made a small, inquiring chirp at nothing. That is the most inconvenient thing anyone has ever said to me. The corner of his mouth moved. It was almost a smile, and it was the first one, and she felt the absence in her chest where her heartbeat used to be loudest go very quiet around it, the way a room goes quiet around a candle being lit. The first day passed like that, in small pieces of conversation broken by long silences in which neither of them looked away from the table. He told her the rules of the watching. The council would not enter her cottage. They would not harm her threshold. They would observe, in shifts, from the rings. and they would speak among themselves in a tongue she would not understand. And on each of the 9 dawns, one of them would approach her door and ask her a question, and her answer would be Wade. He would not be permitted to coach her. He would not be permitted to lie for her. He would be required, at the end, to cast his vote among theirs, and the old law required him to cast it honestly. And if I refuse to answer their questions, that is also an answer. And if I tell them I do not know how to do the thing they are accusing me of, they will not believe you. They will believe you have been trained by a mother who was hanged for it. They will not be wholly wrong. My mother taught me to brew willow tea and pull a breech baby, and keep my mouth shut in front of men with horses, and to not want, which is the discipline. She did not answer that. On the second dawn, an alpha came forward from the inner ring. She was a small gray wolf with a worked silver collar gone black with age, and when she stepped onto the flagstone path, she shifted in a single shudder of muscle and bone that Sable felt in her teeth, into a small gray woman in a plain wool dress, perhaps 60, with eyes the color of wet slate. She did not introduce herself. She stopped at the edge of the dooryard and folded her hands in front of her like a woman about to deliver bad news at a birthing. Midwife, did you know what he was when you splinted him? No. Do you know now? Yes. Would you have splinted him if you had known? Sable was quiet. The marsh was quiet. The otter, who had taken up a position on the threshold itself, looked from the woman to Sable and back with mild interest. I would have splinted him if he had been a man, a wolf, a king, or a stone that bled. I do not ask the wounded what they are before I work. My mother taught me that, and the village hanged her anyway. I am not minded to learn a different lesson from her death than the one she meant me to learn. The gray woman looked at her for a long moment. Then she inclined her head, which was not a bow and was not nothing, and shifted back into her wolf shape and returned to her place in the ring. Behind Sable, in the cottage, Korath said softly, "That was well answered." That was true answered, which is not the same. No, it is better. The third dawn brought a younger alpha, broad-shouldered and dark, with iron braided into his crown, and his question was sharper. Did she understand that her mercy had cost the pact 9 days of slack thread, and that during those 9 days, 3 border skirmishes had broken out between packs that would not have dared move while the thread held tight? Did she understand that 2 children had died in one of those skirmishes? Did she understand that her kindness had a body count? She felt Korath's stillness behind her in the doorway. He had not told her this. The rules forbade it. I did not know. I am sorry for the children. I would be sorry for them if I had splinted no one. I will not pretend that the splint caused their deaths. Men with grievances cause deaths. A slack thread is an excuse, not a reason. The dark alpha bared his teeth. He did not shift back. He simply held her eyes for a beat too long, and then turned and walked back into the ring, and Korath, behind her, breathed out very slowly. He wanted you to apologize for the splint. I noticed. You will vote against you. I noticed that too. The 4th day was quieter. No alpha came to the door. The watching simply watched. Korath spent most of the day at her table with his bound arm propped on a folded cloth, helping her sort dried herbs by touch and smell because his good hand was steadier at it than her 2 together, and they did not speak of the council. They spoke instead of small things, of the otter who had been named, by mutual agreement and in defiance of Sable's policy, moss britches, after an incident involving the woodpile and a quantity of damp lichen. of the spring at the back of the cottage, which her dead husband had cleared and stoned the year before he died, and which had never frozen, not once, in any winter she had kept. Of a scar on Corith's shoulder, a long, pale ladder of one, which he said had come from a boar when he was 16, and which she said, after looking at it for a careful half-minute, had come from a blade and not a tusk, because she had splinted enough boar-gored men to know the difference. He did not deny it. He said, "You are very hard to lie to." I am very hard to lie in front of. Lying to me is easy. Most do. I am only hard to lie in front of because I do not pretend not to notice. He looked at her for a long time across the table. The light in the cottage was the colorless light of late autumn afternoon, and his eyes in it were not yellow but a quieter brown, the human brown, the one that surfaced when his second self had gone briefly to sleep. The absence in her chest where her heartbeat used to be loudest had gone, in the last 2 days, from a strangeness to a kind of patient room, a cleared floor, and she could feel him standing on the other side of it without crossing it. He was being careful. He was being so careful, she wanted to weep. "Corith." "Yes." "What does it feel like, on your side?" He considered. He was a man who considered before he spoke. She liked that about him and was annoyed that she liked it. "Like a door I am not allowed to open, but which I can hear breathing on the other side." "That is a worse description than mine. What is yours?" She thought about it. She thought about the morning the wolf had been gone from her hearth, and she had stood barefoot on her threshold and felt nothing where her heartbeat used to be. She thought about how, since then, the absence had stopped being an absence and started being a place, a small, clean stillness, a held breath that did not need to be let out, a stillness where my heartbeat used to be loudest. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet, which she had not expected, and which he did not try to hide. That is the older description. That is the one in the songs. "Do not tell me there are songs." "There are songs." "I do not want to be in a song." "I know. I do not want you to be in one either. I want you to be in your kitchen, with your herbs and your otter and your spring, and to choose, on the 9th dawn, exactly what you choose." She did not answer. She got up from the table because she did not trust herself sitting, and she went to the hearth and put another log on the fire that did not need another log. And she stood there with her back to him for a long time, and she did not refuse, and she did not accept. And the 4th day ended without any further word between them. On the 5th dawn, a man came to the door who did not shift in front of her. He came already in human shape, walking out of the inner ring as though he had been a man all along. And he was older than Corith, and gentler-faced, and dressed in soft, fawn-colored leathers with a circlet of plain silver across his brow. And Sable disliked him on sight in a way she could not justify. He smiled at her. He said his name was Davian Holm, and that he had been Corith's regent during the poisoning, and that he had ridden 11 days through hard country to be present for the watching, and that he wanted her to know he held no malice toward her at all. "I do not require your goodwill, but I thank you for it." "You require very little, midwife. It is admirable." He glanced past her into the cottage, where Corith was sitting at the table with his arms still bound, and his smile widened by exactly the wrong increment. "He looks better. You have a gift." "I have a craft." "As you say. May I ask my question?" "That is what you are here for." "Indeed." He folded his hands behind his back. "If the council votes against you on the 9th dawn, and Corith Vale is required by old law to cast his voice among ours, what would you have him do?" It was a clever question. It was clever in the particular way of questions designed to have no good answer. If she said she would have him vote with the council, she was a woman who would send her own bonded king to kill her. If she said she would have him refuse, she was a woman who would have a king break old law for her sake. Either answer indicted her. She felt Korath go very still inside the cottage. She did not turn to look at him. I would have him vote his honest reckoning, whatever it is. I did not splint him to buy a vote. I will not be claimed to buy one either. If his honest reckoning is that I am a knife at his pack's throat, then he should vote so. If it is otherwise, he should vote otherwise. I will not tell a king how to be a king. I have enough work being a midwife. Davian Holmes' smile did not change. His eyes did. There was a flicker in them, very brief, of something Sable had seen before in the eyes of men who had come to her cottage to buy charms she did not sell. The flicker of a plan being adjusted on the fly. "Thank you, midwife. That was beautifully said." He bowed. He walked back into the ring. He shifted, in a graceful, unhurried movement, into a fawn-colored wolf with a plain silver band at the brow, and he took his place in the inner ring beside the small gray woman who had asked the first question. And Sable closed the door and leaned her forehead against the wood. "That man is going to try to kill me before the 9th dawn." There was a long silence behind her. Then Korath said very carefully, "Why do you say so?" "Because he asked the question he asked. A man who wanted me dead by the council's vote would not have given me a clean answer to give. He would have asked something I could only fail. He asked something I could pass, and he smiled when I passed it, which means he does not want me to reach the 9th dawn at all, which means he intends to settle the matter privately." She turned. Her hands were perfectly steady. They had been steady at her mother's hanging, too. She had learned the trick of it young. "Who is he to you?" "My father's cousin." Korath's voice had gone quiet in a way she was beginning to recognize as dangerous. "He raised me after the fever took my parents. He stood regent during the poisoning. He has been at my right hand for 30 years. "Was he at your right hand the night you were poisoned?" A silence, a long one. He poured the cup. She nodded once. She had thought as much. She had not wanted to be right. "I will not be permitted to act on this, not without proof. The council will require proof. If I move against him without it, I will be the one who broke the watching, and the vote will go unanimous against you on procedural grounds alone." "Then we will get proof." "Sable, I have 9 days. I have 6 left. I have a man who tried to murder my king, sitting in a ring around my cottage in wolf form, and a council that wants me dead, and an otter who is afraid of nothing. I have," she said, and the small dry crack came back into her voice, the one she did not catch in time, "more resources than I had at my mother's trial. Let me work." He looked at her. The yellow had come back into his eyes, slow, like resin warming. He did not smile. He inclined his head, which she was beginning to understand was the gesture among his people that meant the thing a bow meant among hers, and he said, "Work." The 6th day she did not leave the cottage. She sat at the table and she made him talk. She made him tell her every detail of the poisoning he could remember, every face at the table, every cup poured, every word spoken. She made him tell her the politics, the subpacks, the grievances, the names of the alphas in each ring, and where they stood on the question of human mates, and on the question of Davian Holmes' regency, and on the question of the slack thread. She wrote nothing down. Writing was evidence. She held it all in her head, the way she held the herb catalog of 300 plants, and the labor histories of every woman in 2 valleys, and by the end of the 6th day, she had a map of the council in her mind that was not perfectly accurate, but was accurate enough. Home has 11 alphas in his pocket, maybe 13. The dark one from the 3rd dawn is one of them. The gray woman from the 2nd dawn is not. She is not in anyone's pocket, which makes her the most useful person in the rings. There are at least 40 alphas who came expecting to vote against me on principle, and who have, over the last 3 days, started to wonder why they were so sure. That is more than I had any right to. It is not enough to outvote a unanimous push if Home engineers one. How do you know all that? I watched their breath. She smiled, very small, very tired. Wolves breathe differently when they are bored than when they are listening. By the 3rd dawn, most of them were listening. Home noticed, too. That is why he came on the 5th. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You are terrifying." I am a midwife. Those are not exclusive categories. The 7th dawn brought the attempt. It came in the form of a small, dark alpha she had not seen before, stepping out of the outermost ring just after first light, and walking toward the cottage with something cupped in his hands, something that caught the light wrong. Sable was at the spring drawing water when he came. Korith was inside, asleep at last, his body finally giving up the long argument it had been having with the fever. Mossbritches was on the woodpile, which was not where Mossbritches usually was at that hour, and that was the thing that made Sable look up. The otter was standing on her hind legs, her whiskers were forward. She was making a sound Sable had never heard her make, a low, thin chitter, like a kettle just before the boil. And she was looking past Sable, at the small, dark alpha, and at the thing in his hands. It was a cup, a small, wooden cup. He was bringing it forward as though to offer it. Midwife, a gift, from the council, a token of respect. The cup smelled, even from 12 paces, of something that was not water. Sable had a midwife's nose. She had smelled wolfsbane in tea before, in a cup brought to a laboring woman by a husband who'd wanted a different wife. She knew the smell. She knew also the secondary note under it, the bright, metallic edge that was not wolfsbane and was something older, something that her mother had taught her to recognize without ever naming aloud. The suppressing metal of the songs Korith would not sing to her, a cup that would kill her if she drank it, and would, because she would not drink it, instead be tipped onto her threshold, where it would mark the stone, where the council, on the 9th dawn, would smell it on her skin and conclude she had used it on Korith, that she had drugged him, that her mercy had been a leash after all. She did not move. She did not speak. She let the small, dark alpha take 3 more steps toward her, and then 4, and then she said, very calmly, very clearly, loud enough to carry to the rings, "Davian Home sent you." The small, dark alpha stopped. "Davian Home sent you with that cup. He intends for you to spill it on my threshold and accuse me of poisoning the king, the same poison he used. The cup will smell of suppressing metal, because that is the only poison that touches your kind, and only the king's regent has access to it, and only the king's regent could have provided it tonight. If you tip that cup on my stone, you will be confessing his crime for him. If you turn around and carry it back to him, he will kill you to keep you quiet. There is no version of this morning in which you survive doing what he sent you to do. There is one version in which you survive turning around and walking past him into the inner ring and setting that cup at the feet of the gray woman with the silver collar and asking her to smell it. I would suggest that one. The small, dark alpha stood frozen. His hands trembled around the cup. Mossbritches, on the woodpile, chittered again, low and pointed. Davian Home was already moving. He came out of the inner ring at a smooth, fast stride, smiling, hands open, calling out something about a misunderstanding, and Sable saw, with a clarity she would later remember as the most awake moment of her life, the exact instant the small dark alpha decided. She saw him turn. She saw him walk past Home without stopping. She saw Home's smile lock into a different shape. She saw the cup change hands at the feet of the gray woman, and she saw the gray woman lower her muzzle to it, and she saw the gray woman's hackles come up in a single long ripple, all the way down her spine. The gray woman shifted. So did the inner ring. So, in a slow, concentric wave, did the rings beyond them, all 350 of them, until Sable's dooryard was full of naked and half-dressed people in various states of cold, every one of them silent, every one of them looking at Davian Home. Holmes' mouth opened. He had been a regent for 30 years. He was a man who could talk his way out of most rooms. He started to do it now. He said the cup was a plant. He said the midwife was clever. He said the small dark alpha was lying. He said, Davian. He had come out of the cottage barefoot and bare-chested, with the cloak slung over his bound arm, and his eyes were not the human brown anymore, and not the yellow of the wolf either, but something between them, something Sable had not seen yet, the eyes of a king with both selves awake at once, and in agreement for the first time in 9 days. He was not shouting. He was not even raising his voice. Davian, smell the cup. Davian Home did not smell the cup. He turned and ran, which was the worst thing he could have done in a dooryard full of 350 alphas who had just been told he had poisoned their king. And the council closed on him without sound, without ceremony, without even particular speed, because there was nowhere for him to run. He was brought down at the edge of the tree line. He was not killed there. The gray woman, who turned out to be named Irene and to have been chief justiciar of the pact for 40 years, would not permit it. He was bound. He was gagged. He was set in the center of the inner ring, and the council convened around him, and Sable, who had not moved from the spring, set her water bucket down very carefully on the flat stone and discovered that her knees had decided to stop holding her up. Korath caught her before she went all the way down. His good arm was around her ribs, and his bound arm was somewhere near her shoulder, and his forehead was against her temple, and he was breathing in long, shaky breaths that were not quite sobs and not quite laughter. And he was saying her name, low, over and over, the way the male leads in the songs apparently did, which she had not believed until now. Sable. 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 I am all right. You are not. I am standing. You are not standing. I am holding you up. That is a technicality. He laughed then, which was the first real laugh she had heard from him, and it went into the stillness in her chest, where her heartbeat used to be loudest, and the stillness did not fill exactly, but it warmed, the way a stone warms in the sun without becoming the sun, and she thought, with a small, clear surprise, oh, that is what that is. That is what it has been doing all these days, this quiet, patient room. It has been waiting to see what I would put in it. The council deliberated for the rest of the 7th day and through the night. They did not deliberate about Sable. They deliberated about Davian Home. Sable was no longer the question. She had answered the question by surviving the cup, by naming the scheme, by doing it loudly enough to be heard by the rings, by refusing to be the leash she had been accused of being. The vote on the 9th dawn would be a formality. Korath would not be required to cast against her. Old law would not require him to do anything except witness the conclusion of a watching that had concluded itself. On the 8th dawn, Irene came to the door alone, in human shape, in her plain wool dress, with her hands folded in front of her. Midwife? Justiciar? I have one question left. It is not the council's. It is mine. Ask it. Ureni looked at her for a long moment with eyes the color of wet slate. Will you choose him? Sable did not answer immediately. She looked past Ureni to where Korath was sitting on the low wall of the dooryard with moss britches in his lap. Of all impossible things, the otter having decided, sometime in the night, that the king was acceptable furniture. He was scratching her behind one ear with his good hand. He was not looking toward the door. He was being, she understood, very deliberately not looking toward the door, because he had told her he would not ask, and he had meant it. And he was a man who, when he said a thing, meant it. I have not decided. I do not know if I will decide on the 9th dawn or the 90th. I know that I will not be hurried by a council or by a king or by old law or by a song. If he can wait, I will choose. If he cannot wait, I will not, and that will also be a choice. Ureni's mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. He can wait. I know. That is why he is worth choosing. I know that too. Ureni inclined her head and left. The 8th day passed in a long quiet that was not the silence of the watching anymore, but something else. The silence of a thing concluded that had not yet been put into words. On the 9th dawn, the council voted. The vote was 349-1 against Davian Home. The one being a small dark alpha named Ewan, who had abstained on principle, and who would, Sable suspected, eventually be a justiciar himself. The vote on Sable, when it was called, returned no votes against her at all. The rings dissolved. The crowned wolves who had been her dooryard for 9 days rose, stretched, and went, in ones and twos and small companies, back into the trees, until by midday the fens were her fens again, with only the prince in the frost to say anything had happened. Korath stayed. He did not move into the cottage. He set up a small camp at the edge of the tree line, with a borrowed tent and a borrowed cloak and a borrowed kettle, and he did not come closer than the dooryard unless she asked him to, and he did not ask anything of her at all. He helped her cut peat. He helped her carry water. He let moss britches sleep on his chest in the afternoons when his arm ached and he had to lie flat in the sun. He learned, slowly and badly, to mend a shift, because she had pointed out that she was owed one, and because he was a man who, when he said a thing, meant it. On the morning Sable is at her spring, with the bucket in her hands and her breath going up in the cold, and the sun just over the reeds, she straightens with the bucket full and turns toward the cottage, and sees him at the tree line. He is in wolf shape today. He has been in wolf shape more often since the watching, because the leg heals faster on 4 than on 2, and because, she suspects, his second self likes the quiet of the marsh in a way his human self is still learning to. He is sitting at the edge of the trees with his head up and his ears forward, watching her. He is not coming closer. He is waiting to be invited, which he will always wait to be, which is the answer he gave her on the first night, and which he has not changed since. The stillness in her chest where her heartbeat used to be loudest is steady this morning. It is a place now, not an absence. She has put things in it. The smell of cold reed water and wood smoke at dawn. The shape of his hand on her table. The sound of moss britches chittering at a poisoner. The small gray wolf woman saying he can wait. Her own voice on the 7th dawn, naming a man and saving a king, and not in the saving, becoming anyone's leash. She lifts her free hand. It is not quite a wave, it is the gesture among her people that means the thing a bow means among his. The wolf at the tree line rises. He does not run. He walks, slow and even on the mended leg, across the white grass toward the spring. and Mossbritches comes out from under the woodpile to meet him halfway, and the three of them stand for a moment in the cold light without speaking, because none of them need to, because the morning has the shape it has, and that is enough. She has not yet chosen. She thinks, perhaps, she has been choosing all along, in small, ordinary ways. The way she chose to splint a wolf in the reeds, the way she chose to open the door, the way she chose to name a poisoner out loud in front of 350 witnesses. She thinks, perhaps, that is what choosing looks like, for a woman who spent 30 years training herself not to want anything strongly enough to be hanged for it. Not a single bright moment, 1,000 small, ordinary ones, accumulating, the way a spring fills, the way a fen freezes, the way a stillness, given time, becomes a place a person can live. She picks up the bucket. She walks back toward the cottage. The wolf walks beside her, on the mended leg, at the diplomatic spacing of 4 paces, which is the otter's spacing and is now, it seems, his too. The smoke is going up from her chimney thin and gray. The reeds smell of cold water. The morning is exactly the morning it was on the first dawn, except that her dooryard has prints in it, and her cottage has a chair pulled out at the table, and her chest has a place in it where her heartbeat used to be loudest. And none of those things are going anywhere. There's something about the way he sat at the tree line this morning and waited to be invited that I find really hard to shake. If you were Sable, standing at that spring with the bucket in your hands, what would you have done? I'd love to know what you think. See you in the next story.